Hey guys, Aaron here. Welcome back to another Python Django tutorial. This time we're talking about front-end assets and how to serve them. We're going to be using Bootstrap with a HTML template, and we'll create this homepage with a few links that you can click on, and it's responsive, so it will scale to mobile. So let's get started. Okay, so to create the front end, we're going to use a project called Bootstrap. I believe Bootstrap was initially created by Twitter, but it has since been open sourced. And it's basically an easy way to build a responsive website. If you're familiar at all with front end, you'll know what Bootstrap is. It's just basically a bunch of JS and CSS classes that you can use to build your own website. So if you go into examples, you can see all the stuff that other people have built with this. And there's a bunch of documentation that you can use while you're building your site. Now, the other thing I want to do is download a theme, which we can use for our website. And so I found this really basic one called Start Bootstrap, and it's just a single page here, but I'm probably going to break this up into multiple pages. It does have a lot of nice styling that I like, so I think this will be great to use. If you go to startbootstrap.com, you can see a bunch of different themes that use Bootstrap. If I just scroll down here, you can see some popular themes. Some of them are paid, others are free. I've actually used this SB Admin 2 before, and it's pretty good. But yeah, you can use a different theme if you want, but since this one is simple, I think I'm just going to stick with the freelancer theme. After you download the template from that website, you'll get a zip file, and if you unzip it, you'll see all of the assets for that website. So I'm going to copy all of these into my project directory. And to do that, let's just create a new folder and call it static. Inside of static, which will be the folder which serves all of our static assets, I'm going to create a new folder and call this theme. So just to separate the other assets that we'll be using from the site and the core theme, we'll create another folder. And then I'm just going to copy paste all of this stuff into the theme folder and copy folders. So now you can see all of our assets, and there's a couple things in here that we don't need. If we go into the mail folder, we can get rid of the contactme.php. This was just part of that theme, and it sent emails from the contact form, but we'll create our own implementation for that. There's some validation JS in here. I think we'll just leave that actually. There's a favicon, we'll leave that. We'll just delete that stuff later on. So now we have our theme. We're going to need to do a few things to make sure that our app can actually serve those static assets. To do that, we need to go into settings and make sure that we have the static assets app installed. So that's this one right here, Django contrib.static files. So that's great. And now we're going to add a few other configurations to make sure that we serve those assets. So our static URL is already defined here. This gets prefixed to all of these static files, and the static files will be served in the same, the URLs will be generated in the same way that the folder structure is in your static folder. So now I'm going to create a new variable down here, and this will show our Django app where to search for the static files. So I'm going to name this static files underscore dir equals an array. The array will be filled with all of the directories where we want to search for static files. So I'm just going to copy something that I created earlier. So we're just basically joining the base directory, which is where we define the static folder, with static, because that's what the name of the folder is. And so now we should be good to go. And it's actually static file dirs. I can actually serve an image real quick if I go into our templates, and maybe in the index file, I can just look for an image that's already in my template index.html. This index.js is just exactly the HTML for the website that we were looking at earlier on the Start Bootstrap page. So we can just copy something in here, like maybe this image tag, and display it just to verify that everything's set up for our static asset server. Let's go back into index and just paste this in here. Now, like I said, we're going to have to reference another URL here. And I could do something like this, where I just do static / theme / assets and the path to the file. But if we ever change this static URL, we'll want to make sure that it automatically gets updated for us. So we can make use of a template command. And so to do that, we just have to load our static assets. And then we need to basically use a template command to build the URL for the static asset. So I'm going to put another tag inside of these parentheses. We'll use the static function and then specify the path to that file. So I believe it was theme, sorry, and you have to wrap this with the single quotes, theme / assets / img, and we'll just copy paste this SVG. So I can save that, make sure our server is restarted, and then refresh the page, and you should be able to see that image. And if I go into the network panel and look at my images, you can see it has the static / theme / asset / image. So I do want to mention, when you're debugging this stuff, you want to make sure you have disable cache in your developer tools, because we don't currently have our cache busting set up, which means whenever we serve a asset like JS or CSS or something like that, if it doesn't have a special code that represents the hash of the contents in the file name, the browser will cache it so that it doesn't have to fetch it every time we load the page. If we have this enabled and we make some changes locally, our browser won't update those changes because it's caching them. So while we're developing for now, we'll disable cache, but once we get this app production ready, we'll make sure we put our cache busting mechanisms in place. Okay, so now I'm going to get some more required files set up. And if I go back into our template theme index.html, you'll see all of this stuff in the head, which represents dependencies that this template needs in order to run properly. So I'm just going to copy all of this stuff in the head and go over into our base.html, where we've defined our own head, and come in here and just copy paste it. And since we already have a title, I'm just going to remove the title here, but everything else can stay. And well, actually, maybe I'll get rid of the favicon as well, because we'll probably have our own favicon. And then I need to update some of this stuff so it pulls from the static files directory. Let's go back into index and copy this tag to load static. You can go into base, and it doesn't really matter if you load this more than once, because index extends base, but should be fine to load static here as well. And then we'll just copy this tag so we can replace it with this CSS style sheet. So I'll just copy this and paste it in here after theme, and I can save that. And then there's one more thing that we need to do. So if we go into the templates index again, you can scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see that there are a bunch of JS scripts in here. So we'll need to put those in our base as well. So I'm just going to scroll down here, and I believe these were in body. We probably just want to put them in the same place. Yep. So I'll go back to base, and just paste these right below the main here. So there's some contact form stuff here. I think I'm just going to remove this for now, and we can add that later on if needed. So there's some other third-party libraries up here. One of them is the bootstrap library that I was talking about, so we don't need to do that later on when we start using our own bootstrap stuff. And then here's the core JS scripts for the theme. So I'm just going to copy the static tag up here again, and then replace it with the JS file. So now if I save that and then go back to our web page, refresh it, and then click on JS, you should be seeing the JS stuff loading down here. And if I click on CS, you can see that style sheet loaded as well. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is copy over the nav bar that was on the freelancer page, and I'm going to fill this out with some of the stuff that I already had. So let's go back into the index HTML and the theme, and if we scroll up, everything's nicely commented out for us. So we can just find the nav bar up at the top here and copy this in. So I'll go back up to our templates and click on the nav bar. And now I'm just going to put a few spaces here paste my new navbar, and then comment this out. So if I save this and refresh, you'll be able to see the new navbar at the top here. And this is really nice because it's responsive, so we don't have to worry about styling that. I'm just going to disable the image that I created earlier so it doesn't get in the way. And I'm going to go back into our base HTML and move the navbar under the body. So if I go back into the navbar, you can see that there are a few nav links here, and they just point to sections on the page. And I don't want to do this. I just want to have separate pages for all of these things. So I'm just going to replace that with the URLs that I had for my old navbar here. So let's just copy over all of these variables that we created a couple episodes ago. And now we can reference those variables instead of the section tags. Instead of having the link grayed out and getting rid of the anchor tag like we did earlier with this if-else statement, I'm just going to add an extra class to this link element because it's already set up to work with that extra class to show that it's active. So all I have to do is just copy this if statement, and I'm going to go in here, paste that after this load classes. So if you're not familiar with CSS and HTML, these are all CSS classes, and each class is separated by a space. So I'm just going to add another space and an if and if tag here. And then inside of this tag, I'm going to write active. So it will add the active CSS class if the request path is equal to the index URL. And I can just copy this for all three of these links. All right, and the last thing I need to do is just change the links so that they all match up. So we'll say home will be the first link because it points to the index page. And then about and contact are actually already correct, so we don't need to change those. And then the last thing we need to do for the links is make sure that we disable that code that activates the links as we scroll down in the section here. So to do that, I can just go into our JavaScript for the theme. And if you look at the navbar, it has this tag for main nav. So there's a library that is being used in the scripts.js file to configure that stuff, and it's called scroll spy. So it will look for these tags and then highlight the list elements in the navbar whenever you scroll over one of those. Since I don't want that because we have a separate page for everything, I'm just going to disable this. And if this is confusing to you, usually what I do for some of these themes is I just play around with different options. And as I see things breaking, I just kind of look through the theme code and fix them. It's a lot of just, trial and error and copy and pasting things to make the theme work for your project. Now, if you're writing all this stuff from scratch, you wouldn't have to do that, but it's just easier to kind of hack this stuff together since we don't really care about making our own CSS here. So if I refresh this and look at our menu, you can see all of the pages here. If I actually expand this out and click through here, it'll take me to each separate page. So if you're to inspect element and scroll down, you'll see that it's actually displaying the content that we had earlier, but it's just hidden behind this navbar. So we're going to have to make a CSS class to shift everything down so that you can actually see it and it's not hidden behind the navbar. So I'm just going to go to this header here that was on the old the theme, and there's a class called massHead, which is shifted down already for us, but we just want to copy some of the CSS for this class so that we don't have to build it ourselves. So if we go into the styles and just search for that class, you'll see that there's a class with this padding top here, and this will basically shift everything down automatically for you. So there's one for the mobile screen size, and there's one for a desktop screen size. So we can just copy paste both of these, and we're going to need to put those in a new CSS file that we can override this old one. So I'm going to create a new folder in our static file called CSS. And inside of here, I'm going to create a new file called main.css. So this will have all of our overrides. So if I go back into our styles and just copy this and paste it here, we're now overriding this masthead. But we don't want to do that. We want to create a new class. And if you don't remember, in our base.html, we had a main class here. So I'm just going to give this a ID, and I'll just call this main. So we can shift down the main content automatically underneath the navbar. Let's go back into our main.css and change this. So any IDs are referenced with hashtags, any classes are referenced with dots. I'm going to type hashtag main, and we can keep the same style that we had. Now let's go copy the other style for the mobile version. And let's just put this right above the media query here. So for this one, we'll also use the main. And then the last thing we have to do is actually load that style sheet. So I'm just going to copy this link for the theme styles, and I'll remove theme and just call this main.css. So it should load the main styles. And if I refresh, you can see this thing being shifted down here. Now it looks like our query isn't being set up correctly here because you can see that extra padding. The header that I was talking about earlier actually is supposed to be 6 screen units large. So I'm just going to remove this because we don't need this. We only need the size of the header, which is 74 on mobile and 104 on desktop. So I'll just remove this calculate function down here and save that and refresh it. So now you can see that it's just pushing this down instead of being hidden behind this start bootstrap. Okay, and the other thing is I want to have our logo right here instead of start bootstrap. So if you look at our Hacker Shack website, you see the logo right here. And I could use an image, which is probably the better route to go, but I want to show you how to load custom fonts. You should probably do this if you just have a logo at the top and that's the only thing with that particular font. But like I said, I want to show you how to actually load a custom font and use that for text on the page. So I'll show you how to do that. And I have a font which I use, and it's called, I don't know how to pronounce this. I think it's like some Scandinavian word, but this is the font that I use for Hacker Shack. It's a free font that he made publicly available. And it's an OTF format. Usually you want to have multiple formats for your font that can be supported by different browsers. There's a font conversion tool that I've used before, which is called Font Squirrel. So you just basically upload your font here and it will generate a bunch of different types of fonts that you can use for the web. And you'll have to configure those in CSS to be usable from your website. So I've already done that. I'm just going to create another folder inside of CSS called fonts. Let's just copy paste in those new files. So I've already generated 2 versions of that font, and I'm just going to pull these in. Now, if I go into that CSS file that I just created and add a new tag here and call it font face, I can define a new font face. Let's call the name of this font face Hacker Shack font. And now we need to specify a source. So in Django, in CSS, you can actually specify a local file and it will automatically serve it for you. I'm just pointing to the local folder fonts and those 2 files with the different formats. So OTF stands for open type, and then there's WUF. You can save that. And now if I go into the CSS for the navbar, I can change start bootstrap to Hacker Shack, and I can copy paste navbar brand, which is a class for this logo link on the navbar, go into my main CSS, and then override that with our custom font family. So now if I refresh, looks like it's using the font, but I forgot to save this. So save and refresh. And now you can see Hacker Shack with the new font. And it looks like it's still trying to load a section here. Let's just make this navigate back to the main index page. I'm also just going to move all of these URLs up to the top just so they're in one place and a little bit cleaner. The next thing I'm going to do is restyle some of these components so that they fit better with my channel's color combination. So I already like this navy blue that's being used for the bar here. So let's just change this green to be something more like a red. And to do that, we're going to have to go into our CSS and make some more changes. If we look at the nav bar, you'll see that there are all these modular classes that are assigned to the different elements. And if we look at the menu, there's a BG primary tag. So if I collapse the menu here and inspect this element, you'll see that included in some of the styles are this BG primary class, which has the green color that I'm looking for. So I'm going to create my own BG primary and just replace that. So let's go back into our main CSS and type something like HS period to signify it's a class, and then HS hyphen BG hyphen primary. So the style for this that we saw in our inspect element here is background color. So let's type background color, and then the color that I like is kind of like a lighter red, almost a pinkish color. And I already have a hex color code for that, so I can just paste it in here. And something nice about Visual Studio is it'll actually show you a swatch of the color if you put a hex value in there. We can go back to our nav bar and replace this with HS BG primary. Now if we refresh, we should see that changing color. The next thing I want to do is make these active elements have a underline instead of just a big rectangular box around them. So usually when I do stuff like this, I'll look at the element and see what kind of classes are on this and look at the styles to override them. So it looks like it has a couple styles here, and usually I'll just copy paste all this stuff into my CSS and then just override that value with something that I want. So I've already done this, and I'm just going to copy paste it in, and I'll explain what I'm doing in a second here. So this main nav is the ID of the nav bar. So it's saying for anything inside of a nav with this ID, with any class that has this nav bar dash nav, and anything that's a list element with a nav item class, and also a link with a nav link class should have these styles. So this is the base class, and we're just saying we want by default a 2-pixel solid transparent border, and there will be a transition for the border and the color when somebody hovers over it. With our hover and active classes, so this is just saying if you're hovering over the element, use this style. And this one says if the class appended to the end is active, use this style. So if you're hovering over it, the color of the text will change to the red color, and the border color will change to that red color. And if it has the active class, the color of the text will be white, but the border will be this red color. So it'll show an underline for the border. And finally, if you hover over an active link, it just changes the text color to that red color. So if we save this and refresh, I can show you exactly what happens. So as you can see here, there's an underline, and there's still a rounded corner on here, which we don't want that, but we'll change it here in a sec. But if I hover over it, you'll see the text becomes red. And as I hover over the other links, then they'll add their own borders. Now it's probably rounded because there's an extra CSS class on this element. So let's just look at that. And yep, as you can see, there's a rounded class right here. So if we scroll down, we should be able to see the styles for that. As you can see, rounded means that there's a border radius of 0.5 rem. So I'm just going to go back into my navbar HTML and remove the rounded class from all three of those links. Now if I refresh, you can see that all this stuff is now working. And if I collapse and click on the menu, you can see that it carries over the same styles, which is what we want. All right, now the final thing we're going to do is replicate this main banner that I have on the Hacker Shack website. So Freelancer is actually pretty similar because they have their own banner at the top here. So I think I'm just going to copy some of their styles and modify them a bit to remove some of this extra stuff down here, and also use a background image for the banner. If we go into the index for the theme, all of that stuff is located under the masthead code right here. So let's just copy this and paste it into our init HTML before the heading. And there's a couple things that we don't need here, like the icon divider and the subheading. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. And instead of start bootstrap as the text, I'll just replace it with what I had on my main website, which is we make things. This automatically gets capitalized, so we don't need to worry about caps here. And then we should replace this avatar image with our own image. I already have those on my file system here. So I'm just going to copy in both that image and the cover photo that I had earlier. And let's just create a new folder in our static directory called IMG. This will have all of the images for our website. So I'll just copy these into the IMG folder. And now we can reference them from our HTML just like we did for the other static files. If we refresh this, this logo is way too big if you compare it to the old logo. So I can inspect this and just look at the size so that we can match it up. And it looks like this is about 171 by 171. If you scroll down here to the bottom, it shows you a nice little visualization of the size. So we can inspect this element, and it looks like it's the masthead avatar. See where they define the size. So it looks like this CSS class. I'm just going to copy this and put it in our CSS file and overwrite it. And we'll say the width of this is 170 pixels. And the height is also 170 pixels. Now, if we refresh this, you can see that the size is reduced. The other thing is I noticed there's a bit of extra space at the top here, and we don't want that. It's because our old masthead media query included the size of the header, but since we already have our padding at the top here, we can just change these to remove the extra padding at the top. So I can remove the calc function from padding top here, and just replace it with 6rem. And I'll have to do the same thing for the non-media query version, which should be down here. And the reason why I have to duplicate this is because the old style still exists on the old CSS. So we're just overriding both of those. And now you can see the header fits better in this space. The last thing we'll want to do is add a background image and replace this green color. So we can inspect this and see the class. And it looks like it's this masthead header. So we can just override the CSS for the masthead class. And I've already done this. So I'm just going to copy it and paste it into our CSS down here. And it just references the image in the directory for the images. We're saying we want to cover the background and we don't want to repeat the image. So the image will just kind of fit inside of the container. And save that and refresh the page, and now we have our new image. And maybe the last thing we want to do is just change the background color so that when it loads in, we don't see that green color for the first time. And so I can just look through here and try to find where it's defining the color, and it looks like it has a VG primary class on there. So I'm just going to go in and remove that from the CSS. And there we go. So I'm going to stop here for the styling. I think I'm going to come in the next episode with most of the styling filled out. We'll still do a little bit more styling for things like the contact page and the blog posts, but I'll just go through and fix some of the other pages that we've created so far, like the profile page and the login button. All right, that's it for this episode. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you keep up to date with all the new episodes for this series. Also, we have all of the code on our Patreon. It's $5 a month, but you get access to all the source code, and you can just download any of the zips here from any of the episodes if you want to follow along. Thanks again for watching. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about how to build a contact form and build out some of the APIs necessary to send emails. So see you next time.